There we go, Chair. Make that 10 o'clock.
Thank you. Okay, go on. Sorry for that, technical issues. I'd like to welcome everyone to this hybrid meeting of the General Licensing Committee. This meeting is being broadcast live over the internet and will be available to view online now and in the future. May I remind members that the statutory guidance made under Section 4 of the Local Government Wales Measure 2011 and our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy, any member attending a meeting remotely must be able to be seen and heard by the members and officers who are attending the meeting, as well as by members of the public viewing the meeting. So can I ask you all, please use your cameras for the duration of the meeting. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. I've had no request for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. Members in the chamber, please be aware that we're all on camera and that may be visible on screen when people around you are speaking. And please remember to speak clearly into your microphones. Members participating remotely, can you please refrain from using the chat function and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. And also, please remember to keep your microphone muted when you are not talking. Thank you for that. Moving on to the agenda. Item 1, attendance and apologies. Chris, have you any apologies, please?
We have apologies from Councillors Liam Coles, Norma Parish and David Thomas.
Okay, thank you for that. We then move on to item 2, declarations of interest. Members, do you have any interest to declare? No? Nobody? No? All right, thank you for that. We'll then move on then to item 3, which are the minutes of the last meeting on the 26th of the 9th, 2024, and it's pages 3 to 8. Members, could you possibly state whether you have anything in relation to the minutes? If not, I will take them as approved. Are we all happy to approve that? Yeah? Okay, thank you. Right, we then move on to item 4, which is the amendment of the Constitution, licensing matters, page 9 to 26. Claire, Principal Solicitor, can you deliver your report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to share my screen first of all. Hopefully you will see that it's part 7. You'll have seen from the report that prior to 2020 we had one licensing committee, and then in 2020 it was divided into 2 committees for the Statutory Licensing Committee and the General Licensing Committee, and the Constitution was changed in accordance with that. But having reviewed the situation, it now feels necessary to amend that so that it makes it clearer. So none of the changes substantially change anything that we're asking the committee to do. It is a matter of essentially formatting. So on part 7, apologies that your pack had sorry, I'm just trying to get something else off my screen. Your pack had a version which didn't show all of the track changes. So hopefully yesterday you will have received the version which does, but regardless, I can show you it on the screen. That moving down, see most of it is the same, but in terms of the terms of reference, you'll see that essentially all that's happened is we've taken out a very generic part of it and changed it so that it sets out what the Statutory Licensing Committee functions are and the General Licensing Committee functions. The remainder of the changes within Part 7 is in relation to the changing in numbering that then creates, and that goes down into the remainder of the document. So, are there any questions on that to begin with? Before I move on to Appendix 7. So if I then stop sharing, and then I will move on to Appendix 10.
Do you want to ask if there's any questions?
Sorry, I was asking, are there any questions on that? I would thought that's fairly self-explanatory. The next one is the more difficult one. So our previous Appendix 10 is where the majority of the changes come in. So you will see, this is the current appendix to the Constitution, and you will see that there's general issues first, then the statutory licensing panel issues, then there's general licensing panel issues, and then it goes on to things that are for both again. So what we've tried to do is to, I'll move on to Appendix 2, sorry I'm dotting around, but it's difficult not to. So Appendix 3, what we've tried to do is to bring in so that all of the matters that relate to the both committees are dealt with at the beginning, and then it moves on to panels, setting out what the panels will do and setting out what the statutory licensing panel will do and what the and what the general licensing committee will do. You would also see, sorry that I'm whizzing back up, but perhaps you don't need to see this, but you will also see that there's changes to the delegation so that it includes that the head of public protection and environment can refer matters back to the licensing committee. Previously, it was just the strategic director of economy and environment. This fits in with how the authorisations have been changed within the council anyway. In addition to this, there are changes proposed in terms of the examples which are given to the general licensing panel. So we're taking out reservoirs and adding in, you have seen these highlighted, mobile home sites and town and village green applications. The reason for this is just to make it easier for officers of the council and also for the general public to see what the licensing committee will do. Should any matters come up that are capable of being dealt with by the panel or by the licensing committees, these will be covered anyway, because it's not a case of this list is exhaustive. It's a case of this is examples of what will be dealt with. So hopefully you'll see, that you will see that it's just a matter of simplifying and making it easier for people to read and to follow what the scheme of delegation is for the licensing matters. Thank you, Chair. That's the end of the report, but obviously if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Any members got any questions or comments they'd like to ask there? No?
Thank you, Chair.
Anybody in the field? The recommendation then is on page 11 of your agenda. The members want to consider and comment on the changes, if there's any, on the Constitution, as set out in paragraph 2, 3 or 4. Or do you all agree with the recommendations? Yeah, agree. Yeah, agree. You all happy on screen? Yeah. Anybody not happy with the recommendation? No. That's carried. Thank you for that. We then move on to item 5, which is the workload update, and it's quarters 1 and 2. So that's April 2024 to September 2024, and that's on page 27 to 40. Can I ask you to deliver? Claire, the other Claire is going to deliver this report for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just check that members on screen can hear me okay? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. So the first report this morning that I am presenting is to update members on the workload of the licensing team during quarters 1 and quarter 2 of the current financial year. That's the period from April until September. The report focuses on matters falling to the General Licensing Committee, that being Hackney Carriage and private hire licensing, scrap metal, charity collections, street trading, smoke-free legislation, animal establishment licensing and sex establishment licensing. As you can see from the report, during the first 2 quarters of the year, the team have dealt with 40 complaints relating to Hackney Carriage and private hire licensing. Complaints received include allegations of undeclared medical conditions, using a mobile phone whilst carrying passengers, unacceptable conduct of licensed drivers, allegations of dangerous driving, and unlicensed businesses offering private hire services. All complaints received have been investigated and action taken as appropriate, which is included in a number of written warning letters being issued. Over the last few months, the team have received several complaints in relation to the provision of licensed wheelchair accessible vehicles in the borough. The team are currently in the process of liaising with the trade and partner agencies to look at the issues that are being experienced, with a view of consideration of possible solutions to help improve the situation. Part 4.2 of the report highlights the delegated decisions that have been dealt with during the reporting period, and as you can see, there has been 12 separate reports that have been subject to delegated decision. In relation to licensing panel hearings, there have been 5 licensing hearings held during the first 2 quarters, and these are following the decisions to refer certain matters to licensing panel for determination, and as outlined in paragraph 4.2 of the report, and a summary of those matters are contained within 4.3.1 of the report. There have been 2 complaints received during the period in relation to scrap metal. Both complaints related to allegations of individuals collecting scrap metal in the area without holding the required licence. Both complaints have been investigated and advice given as appropriate. There have been no complaints in relation to charity collections during the period. The team have dealt with 6 complaints relating to street trading during quarter 1 of the period, 4 of which of those 6 complaints related to the street trader. An investigation was carried out relating to the 4 complaints, and it was found that the trader was not selling goods on the street, and therefore a street trading consent was not needed. There have been no complaints received relating to smoke-free legislation during the period. The team have dealt with 11 complaints during the period from April to September in relation to animal establishment licensing and animal health and welfare. The team have dealt with a complaint relating to an allegation of fly grazing, which is where an owner allows their horses to graze on land without the landowner's permission. In this case, the horse was found to be grazing on council-owned land without permission. After making contact with the owner and asking that the horse be moved, the owner complied with the request. During the period, the team received 3 complaints relating to unlicensed dog breeding and concerns over the welfare of animals kept at an unlicensed establishment. The complaints resulted in a multi-agency approach being taken, and the matter is still subject to ongoing action, but members will be updated once the outstanding matters have been concluded. There has been no complaints in relation to sex establishment licensing during the period. The workload activities undertaken are included in the activity report, which is attached at Appendix A. Some of the targets in place have not been achieved, and this is due to staff resourcing pressures within the team, which have resulted in some delays in meeting service response teams. We currently have 2 vacant posts within the licensing team, one within the admin support team, and recruitment processes are currently underway, and it's anticipated that both posts will be filled in January 2025. There have been no complaints against service during the reporting period for matters which fall to the General Licensing Committee for determination. It is recommended that the committee note and provide any comments on the content of this report and note the activity report for April to September 2024. Thank you, Chair. That's my first report.
Thank you for that. Any members got any questions or comments they'd like to put across? Councillor.
Just a point of clarity on the taxi licence for, sorry, I was trying to find the wording for it, for the wheelchair accessible vehicles. It says that there's complaints in relation to the provision of the accessible vehicles. Is that because there isn't sufficient provision, there isn't enough of them, or the provision that there is isn't actually suitable for what they say it is?
Thank you. Thank you. A bit of both, really. The complaints involve that there's not enough wheelchair accessible vehicles on the fleet, but there's also been complaints that those that are on the fleet are not available. Now, a lot of these wheelchair accessible vehicles are involved in contracts, school contracts and social services contracts. So it's a bit of an all-round complaint, really. One, that there's not enough wheelchair accessible vehicles on the fleet, and two, that those that are licensed are not always available.
Yeah, thank you for that. I did wonder if it was both. Are there actual figures then of how many vehicles should be provided in an area, or is it just what's deemed reasonable?
There's no actual guidelines as to how many should be provided in the area. I think at the moment 10% of our fleet is wheelchair accessible. I think we've got about 14 vehicles. But you know, we're working with the trade at the moment. We started those initial discussions to see what we can do as a local authority to encourage people to put the wheelchair accessible vehicles as licensed vehicles. Obviously, with the vehicle comes expense. These vehicles are really expensive, but we're also talking to the trade and various forums just to get a better understanding of the issues that are being faced, and then working together then to get the ideas to how we can overcome these problems.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you.
James, for that. Councillor Clarkson, you've got a question? Been lost somewhere. Yes, drop off. I got a question anyway, so perhaps you'll be back on by then. With your reduction in your staff, how long is the time frame between dealing with complaints and the follow-up to that complaint?
Each complaint is looked at on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, if it's a complaint of a very serious nature, priority is given to dealing with that complaint. We have had to lower our complaint response from 3 days to 5 days, but hopefully with the recruitment process that we're undertaking at the moment, come January, we can sort of get back to our 3-day working response in dealing with complaints.
We've lost Councillor Clarkson at the moment. Yeah, and Councillor.
Good morning, everybody. Scrap metal. We see across the borough many people coming around collecting the streets. In fact, it's becoming very noticeable. If you want to leave a fridge out, normally it gets picked up by the scrap merchant. In fact, last week we had something I've never seen before. Talking about scrap metal, it was a vehicle that was chopped in half. Half of it went onto the back of a vehicle and half of it was left where it was chopped in half. My question is that although that we get complaints, how much monitoring do we do to those people that actually currently do that? Because this person, there was another issue in the town that happened previously that was affected the same person. How much monitoring do we do on that, please? Thank you.
Firstly, I'd like to say that if you've got any complaints, or if any of the people living in your area have complaints about scrap metal, please let us know. One of the key things that the complainant can provide us with is a vehicle registration number, because that then allows us to do the necessary checks for the registered keeper and make contact with the person to advise them. All complaints are dealt with. Contact is always made where possible. Sometimes, we make contact, but we don't necessarily get a response back. Officers, when they are out and about in the borough, are always mindful of what's going on. Unfortunately, we can't be out there all the time in every area, but all officers in the team are aware of the complaints that we deal with and are mindful when out and about doing other activities.
Thank you for that. Councillor Clarkson, would you like to come back in the question? We've asked other questions while you were off screen. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Internet dropped out, unfortunately. I'm not sure whether it's been asked or not, but I was going to ask whether or not what solutions are being sought regarding solving this problem with the wheelchair accessible vehicles.
Thank you, Councillor Clarkson. We haven't got to the solution stage yet. We're just starting the process of talking to the trade to see the issues that they're facing. And I've got a meeting in the diary for January with one of the forums to talk to wheelchair users to find out the issues that they're experiencing. So we are at the very early stages at the moment. Possible solutions could be revising our current policy to see whether or not that would help. But as we mentioned, and I think we lost connection there, the cost of the vehicles as well plays a big part. So yeah, we are sort of at the initial stages, but we are welcome to any comments or thoughts from anyone, including members, about how to alleviate this problem.
If I could just come back with a supplementary, Chair, will we be updated on that meeting in January as to any solutions that might have been suggested?
Of course, we've got licensing committee, I believe, penciled in for February, so I can provide an update following the meeting in January.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Has any other members got any questions before we move on to the recommendations? No? The recommendation is on page 31 of your agenda. What it states, the committee note the contents of the report and the activity report for April 2024 to September 24. So, do members agree with the recommendation? Yeah. Thank you very much. Does anybody don't agree? Anyway, thank you for that anyway. We now move on to item 6, which is the approval for consultation of proposed Hackney carriage and private hire licence fee 2025 to 2026. And they are on page 41 to page 50. Who's going to be delivering on this report? Claire again. Volunteer, well done.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to share my screen. So the second report from myself for General Licensing Committee this morning relates to the approval from members for consultation of the proposed Hackney carriage and private hire licence fees for 25-26. Certain fees are deemed to be non-statutory in that local authorities can determine what or whether to charge. And as I mentioned, this report refers to the non-statutory fees for Hackney carriage and private hire licensing that fall to the authority for determination. The calculated costs are based on the budget salary costs for 25-26 in line with the Council's medium-term service and financial plan, and central service apportionments and direct costs are based on the 23-24 actual costs or confirmed costs. And under the constitution of the Council, the setting of fees levied for licences falls to the Licensing Committee for determination. Part 4 of the report sets out the general fee setting principles, which takes into account relevant legislation and guidance around fee setting for local authorities. Fees are reviewed annually using the steps as stipulated in 4.1.2 of the report, and a cost calculator is then updated to calculate any changes in fees using the Wales Licensing Expert Panel spreadsheet as recommended. For each type of licence, there are 3 main elements that are calculated. Those are the underpinning costs, the specific licence steps relating to each type of licence from initial advice through to the administration and approval of the licence, and including any costs relating to compliance, and the hourly operational costs to the authority for each officer. The taxi licence fees for 25-26 have been calculated using the methodology as stipulated in the report and are shown in Appendix A. Fees for 1-year and 2-year licences were introduced in 24-25, and these options are proposed to be continued to go forward. You will note that there are slight fee increases for the fees calculated for Hackney carriage and private hire driver licences for the 25-26 period. This is due to the increase in direct costs to support the licensing function. 4.2.5 of the report shows the impact of the proposed licence fees, which will depend on the number of licences affected. Paragraph 4.2.5 shows the number of licences for each of the private hire and Hackney carriage licensing regimes, and the length of the licence, and then the number of renewals that are due in 25 to 26. As I mentioned, the proposed fees for 25-26 are included at Appendix A. There are 73 Hackney Carriage and private hire driver licences due for renewal in the period, and the fees calculated propose an increase from the current fee of £362 to £392 for a 3-year licence. The proposed fees for private hire operator licences shows an increase of £75. There are 3 private hire operator licences due for renewal in the 25-26 period, and if all licences were renewed, this would equate to an increase of £225. There are 159 licensed vehicles due for renewal in 25-26. There is a proposed increase of £5 per vehicle for renewal. It is difficult to calculate an estimated income for this type of renewal, as some vehicles may not be renewed and some are over the age of 8 years of age, which will have a different renewal fee, and some may not be suitable to be relicensed. A comparison of the fees charged in neighbouring authorities is shown at Appendix B for information, and it should be noted that the fees included are for the 24-25 period, as neighbouring authorities have not yet reviewed their fees for the forthcoming year. Members have previously agreed a reduction in fees for wheelchair-accessible vehicles and electric vehicles, currently £80 in respect of new applications and £70 for renewal applications. Members are asked if they wish to continue offering a discount, and if so, the level of the discount. A discount would be beneficial in demonstrating the Council's support for the provision of wheelchair-accessible vehicles and electric vehicles, but any discounts would need to be funded and cannot be recharged to other licence applicants. At the time of writing this report, there were currently 15 wheelchair-accessible vehicles and 1 fully electric vehicle licence with Torvine. This is an increase of 1 wheelchair-accessible vehicle since last year. We currently have 28 hybrid vehicles licensed, an increase of 13 hybrid vehicles since the previous year. The recommendations are stated in Part 8 of the report, and those recommendations are: 1, that the Licensing Committee approve the proposed taxi licence fees, which will go out to the trade and the public for consultation; or 2, should members not approve the proposed fees, indicate the fees that should be consulted upon; and 3, indicate if a reduction in the licence fee in respect of wheelchair-accessible vehicles and/or electric vehicles should continue, and if so, what reduction should be applied. Thank you, Chair. That's my report.
Thank you for that. Any questions from any member or any comments to Claire? Carry on, yeah.
The discussion between electric and hybrid and electric, is there a difference in reduction on cost? Because obviously electric is solely electric and hybrid is obviously fuel and electric.
At the moment, no, the reduction is... Apologies, I put my mic on. At the moment, the reduction is for the solely electric vehicles.
Not the hybrid?
Not the hybrid.
Right, okay. Right, thank you.
Jane?
Thank you. Yeah, looking at Appendix B, and obviously I'm not sure if this has been asked or questioned in the past, but just looking at the 24-25, because I appreciate the other authorities haven't given up-to-date figures. Our figures are higher than the other authorities. I wondered what the reason for that was.
Thank you. The fees could be different for a number of reasons. Obviously, the fees are part of the fees that are proposed. Part of the fee calculation, are based on our officers' hourly costs, so they could be different from authority to authority. Obviously, we go through an extensive calculation process, calculating the steps undertaken to produce each licence. That could be varying from authority to authority. Obviously, I can only comment on the steps that we do. I can't comment on how other local authorities come to their figures. But please be assured that in sort of putting together these proposed fees, we do undertake a very extensive process, and I can say that the fees proposed are a true reflection to cover the costs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you happy with that, Jane? Yeah. Any other members now before we go on to the recommendations?
Sorry, I just got
Yeah, go on.
So am I reading this right? We're the only borough in the area that actually do a reduction for electric vehicles, is that right?
I cannot provide an answer to that one, sorry, because I don't have those figures to hand. Obviously, the figures I've presented here are for the Gwent authorities. But unfortunately, I can't give you a definitive answer on that one at this moment in time.
You okay now?
Yeah.
Excellent. Any other questions? No? No. Well, the recommendations are on page 45 of your agenda. Hopefully you've all read them, but if not, I will read them again if you want to. Do members agree with the recommendations?
Yep.
Yeah, are we all in agreement? Anybody didn't? Okay, thank you for that. That's been agreed. We move on to item 7 then, which is the update on licensed vehicle testing arrangements, which is page 51 to 88. Robin, you're going to deliver that report? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this follows on from a report considered by the General Licensing Committee at its last meeting in September. To briefly recap, since the 16th of February 2024, the Council has been without an approved garage to carry out 6 or 4 monthly tests of licensed Hackney carriages and pipe hire vehicles, or to test new vehicles before they're licensed for the first time. As required by the Council's policy and administration regulation of Hackney carriage and pipe hire licences. A temporary deviation from the policy has been in place since then that allows an annual standard MOT certificate issued by any DVSA-approved garage to be accepted in place of a certificate of compliance issued by a Council-approved garage. The MOT test is a lower standard of test than the compliance test, as the MOT test doesn't check compliance with licence conditions. So things like vehicle signage, meters, roof lights, first aid kits, etc. We carried out a procurement process between March and June this year to try and find a new garage to test vehicles on behalf of the Council. As part of that process, all DVSA-approved garages in Torvine were written to advise them of the availability of the vehicle testing contract. Despite 2 bids being received, no contract was awarded though. At its last meeting on the 26th of September, the committee resolved to extend the temporary deviation until today's meeting and also to consider long-term options for the testing of licensed vehicles today. 3 possible long-term options are set out in section 4 of the report, and they are that a new procurement process could be carried out to try and find a new garage. Secondly, the policy could be permanently changed so that compliance tests are no longer required, and instead vehicles are only required to pass an MOT test. And the third option could be that the policy is permanently changed so that only MOT tests are required, but that officers would inspect vehicles annually before a vehicle licence is renewed. Paragraphs 4.3 and 4.4 of the report provide a discussion about those options and their implications. Carrying out a new procurement process is likely to be the cheaper option for the taxi trade if the testing frequency remains as per the taxi policy, i.e. at 6 monthly or 4 monthly intervals, so 2 or 3 tests a year where the vehicle is over 1 year old. Although that would be based on the cost of compliance tests set by previously approved garages compared with the maximum cost of an MOT test set by the DVSA. The procurement process would also be less resource intensive for officers. So that is therefore the recommended option, but if a garage isn't approved following the second procurement process, it's recommended that consultation is carried out with the taxi trade and also the public to explore alternative options. It's also recommended that the current temporary deviation is extended for 12 months or until a long-term solution is found if that happens in less than 12 months. And that would allow vehicles to remain licensed without the need of a head of service or licensing panel decision each time that an application is received or a vehicle test is due. And that would therefore maintain the taxi provision in Torvine for members of the public, as well as providing proprietors and vehicle and drivers with the opportunity to earn a living. So the recommendations are as set out in section 8 of the report, and those are on page 56 and 57 of the agenda. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Roman. Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much for this report. It's quite concerning that we don't have that procurement in the area, and I welcome a new procurement to look at it. However, the test is there because of a reason. Would you be looking now to actually look outside the borough to get that procurement just on the edges of the borough, to be able to achieve that, working with other boroughs around the area, so we could actually establish this procurement, which to me, and I think being new to the panel, it's very important that we have this testing facility, and if we don't have that testing facility right now, surely we're putting things not at risk, but we're putting them into a situation where we shouldn't be. So is it now time to look outside the borough, within the other boroughs around us, so we can actually get this process back into the place it should be? Please, thank you.
That is something we can explore. The last procurement process was limited to Torvine, as members were sort of advised at the last meeting. I mean, if the committee would like officers to kind of explore going further afield, the only thing to note is that we visit the garages quite frequently, so obviously there's going to be, if they're a long way outside Torvine, then that's going to be kind of an additional journey that we're going to be taking potentially 2 or 3 times a week. But it's something we can explore if the committee is sort of would like us to do that. If that helps.
Right there.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I wouldn't say to go right out into the boroughs, but on the fringes of each borough. So, for example, we've got Newport, which is just down the road. You know, we've got other areas around us that potentially would have garages that we David over. I'm also very conscious that we're now asking a taxi driver to move out of the borough to be able to get a service that we have. You know, the ideal situation currently is to be able to find a garage in Torvine to be able to do that. But the bottom line is, I think, through reading this report and the last meeting, this is imperative that we have this in place. I think as a committee, we should be looking at the progress of that and where we can do that to actually move this forward, because we need this. Thank you.
Could just quickly come back on that. It was a prerequisite for the last procurement process that the garage was located in Torvine, but we can score it, so that it's no longer, or change the scoring, so it's no longer prerequisite, but the garage would score higher if they were located in Torvine, so they would get priority over a garage outside Torvine. But yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Can I just clarify how many times you've put this process out to tender, and how realistic is it that if we do it again, we're going to get a different response?
We, the last time the contract was awarded, we carried out the procurement process in 2022, and then only one garage bid for the contract. I think that was correct. And they were awarded the contract, but that ended in February this year. We went out for procurement again, and so we've done it once since 2022, and there were only 2 garages that bid, but unfortunately they went off the contracts following an assessment of their bids. To be completely honest, we don't know what response we're going to get. We'll write to all garages again in Torvine to advise them of the contract. We'll make the taxi trade aware as well, because potentially they know garages that might be interested outside of Torvine they use that might want to bid for the contract. We don't know, unfortunately, if there is an appetite for it or not. We'll have to wait and see. Apologies, I can't really provide an answer to that.
Yeah, so sort of a supplementary to that, if garages did bid and there were issues with the tender, which obviously has happened before, are we as an authority then in a position to help them change whatever their practices are to make them fit our tendering process, or can it not work like that?
We do sort of negotiate over our requirements, so there's certain things that we can't deviate from, as in they need to be a DVSA-approved garage in order to be assessed by the DVSA to test vehicles, things like that. But in terms of policies and the services they provide in their facility for drivers, like toilet facilities and things like that, we can negotiate over that. So there is scope to kind of, well, almost lower our standards to a certain extent, or just, score them appropriately, depending on what we're asking for. But not lower our standards, that's not the right thing to say. No. But I mean, there's certain things that aren't mandatory, sort of having, tea, coffee facilities, that sort of thing. That's an added bonus, but I mean, it's not mandatory. So we score them based on what they offer. But in terms of having the ability to test our vehicles, that is a mandatory requirement. So we unfortunately can't really assist them to overcome that, other than direct them in the direction of the DVSA, who they can kind of work with to, get approval to test higher standard vehicles, that sort of thing. So We will assist where we can, but certain things we can't, as a council, as officers, assist with. So.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you for that. Councillor Clarkson, if you'd like to ask your question.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I know we discussed this going outside of the Torfaen borough on previous occasions, and we've talked about the scoring, the point scoring for tenders that are received. Is there any scope within that to actually grade garages that potentially could apply that are in a closer proximity to Torfaen? As councillor has pointed out, some maybe are just on the borders. I like the idea of asking the taxi sort of industry if they've got any suggestions as well, as to companies that could be interested or suggestions. And I think we need to be focusing on the necessary now. You mentioned points for providing tea and coffee facilities. We really need to be focusing on the necessary now, and maybe putting a slightly less emphasis on the nice.
Yeah, but thank you, Councillor Clarkson. Yeah, that is kind of where we are. So we, as I say, we have the mandatory or essential criteria that the garages have to meet. Everything else is kind of open for discussion. We score them based on what they offer. But we could look to score, rather than being a garage in Torfaen being mandatory, we could, as I sort of said, we could score it. So say if it's within Torfaen, they get the highest score if they for that criteria. If it's within a mile of Torfaen, they could receive slightly less, and then sort of work outwards from there. So that is something we could explore when we sort of set up the procurement process.
Yes, please, if we could look at it.
If I can come in there, Chair.
Yeah.
I think obviously we do this under the guidance of our procurement service within Torfaen, so I think we need to have that discussion with them as well and seek advice from them going forward.
Councillor Holland, do you want to have another? All right. First of all, I've got to declare that I'm a DVSA tester. But the other thing is, do we have any feedback from the garages we actually approach to see why they don't take it up?
No, we didn't have contact from them. We sent out letters, but to be fair, we didn't go around ringing people just to see why they've not bid for the contract. So I can't provide any feedback on that, unfortunately.
Councillor Watkins, do you want another one?
Yeah, just as a supplementary to that then, is it not felt, especially considering the situation that we're in, that might be a worthwhile thing to do? Because it may be something that, again, is completely out of our remit. You know, obviously we can't make garages do this, but it could be relatively minor things, you know, that we could help them change or make them misunderstand things, and then we could change it, because obviously at the moment we're lacking the garage to do this testing for us.
Yeah, we can explore that potentially. I mean, I don't necessarily commit to anything here, but we could potentially speak to procurement and see whether we could do. They've suggested in the past we could maybe do expressions of interest almost, just to find out what the appetite is, and then and through that process, kind of look at what obstacles there may be to kind of bidding for the contract, and then see if we can put things in place to allow garages to overcome that. So yeah, we can explore that.
You all right with that? Yeah. All right. Any other questions before we move on to the recommendations? Nobody? No? The recommendations are on page 56 and 57 to your agenda. They've all been presented. Are members happy to agree the recommendations? You all right? You all right? Everybody on screen? Yeah. Well.
So I trust the member that I've asked for.
Yeah. You all right with the amendment on that? Yeah, that's fine. Sorry, Nick. Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you for that. Yeah. We'll now move on to the last bit, the date of the next meeting, which is the 20th of the 2nd, 25. And for your information, according to this, the next meeting is scheduled to take place on the 20th of February, 2025. All right. Thank you, members. That is the end of this meeting. We should probably look to take up the next meeting in the next 5 minutes, Chris?
Yeah, I'll just close this down, reload it, and let you know when I'm ready.